Hello and welcome everybody to our worldwide webinar for the tips and tricks for DocuWare administrators regarding Workflow Manager basics today. My name is Bernd Breitenstein. I'm responsible for the support team Green here in the DocuWare EMEA support and your host of this webinar today. Very warm welcome from my side. Yeah, we are very proud to have such a large audience today from across the world. So thanks a lot for everybody for being here with us and attending today's webinar. What are our goals for today? Basically, we want to enhance your knowledge of the Workflow Manager. This is the most important topic, I'd say, by showing the newest features to you, and yeah, also show you how to solve your problems on your own in the end. This also a little look forward to the next week's webinar advanced session. So if you did not register for this yet, then feel free to do it, as you'll learn even more than today. So what are the topics basically for today? We want to show you information about workflow basics, as I said, and these are the topics that we consider as most important, and that also you considered as most important as you provided feedback in the last webinar, which would be the most interesting topics and was most interesting module in the end also. And the Workflow Manager was by way the one that was wished most of the time. So again, as we said last webinar, as it is always, we are always open to your ideas and topics that you are interested in. So just let us know what your ideas are, what you want to know, and what we might cover in the next webinar. Let's also have a little look at our team for today. So first of all, the moderators are myself and Phil Robson from the support team from the DocuWare Corporation from the US. And then we have our presenters of the webinars this week and next week. Today, Greg will be your presenter, supported by Michael. And next week, it's the other way around. So Michael will be the presenter of the advanced session, and Greg will be his supporter then. We have also some background stuff for answering questions during the webinar or for other topics that might come up, which is Gerardo and Matthias. Also very warm welcome to the rest of the team. The most relevant questions related to the topics that we present today we'll we'll collect in the end and answer live in a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. And besides that, or to ask questions, to send us questions, you can, or you should use the GoToWebinar panel. There you'll find a questions area, and you could use this to ask us questions that we will try to answer directly during the webinar. And as I said, the most interesting one, or the ones that we consider as most interesting for the variety, or for the most of the participants, we will present and ask in the end in this live Q&A session. Before we will start with the webinar, there is a little poll that I wanted to start now, which is that we want to know and are very interested in the question, how many DocuWare systems using Workflow Manager do you maintain or work with? Would be very interesting to see whether you have any experience at all, and in the end also whether it's just more maybe your own system, so only one system that you are working with, or it's multiple. If you're a DocuWare partner, for example, and are maintaining systems of various of your customers. As I can see, there are a lot of answers already incoming, and so far the majority, although it's a little bit tight, majority is voting for or is answering with one system, which is most likely your system that you're working with, your DocuWare system that you're working with. On the other hand, also nearly 1/3 or 1/4 I did answer with 2 to 5 systems. And interesting enough, also 12% with 11 or more systems. So that's very interesting. Thanks a lot for answering this quick poll at the beginning. So I'll close this one. And in the end, that's it for this little introduction. And I would like to ask Greg now, as your presenter today, to take over and start with today's webinar. Enjoy.
All right, good morning and good afternoon. Excuse me, across the board. As Bernd said, my name is Greg Van Tassel. I'm actually the green team leader in the US. So we handle a lot of the workflow and installations and whatnot. So today, what we have a pretty basic workflow set up for you guys. We'll run through and walk you through everything. We'll walk through the configurations and sample through the whole process as well. So I hope everyone can see my screen. No problem here. And so today, what we're going to be using is we're going to be using our cloud system. So we have easy access across the board. Has all of our features that we need for workflow, and we keep everything well organized. So first things first, before we get started on any workflow, we need to be able to have our tools to do so. So what we need is our workflow designer. Most of you may, if you have already been monitoring a workflow process, are familiar with this, and it's done right through our desktop apps. So here we have, what I'll do is go ahead and once you're logged in, you may go ahead and install desktop apps, and it'll create your client setup. Just give a moment here while it loads up. Okay, so when you first open it up, most of the time you will see this very similar screen. It'll show what you have installed. For our workflow designer, I'm just going to hit show administrative options, and here we have workflow designer. So for this, I do already have mine installed, so I will close out of it. Okay, so once you open up your workflow designer, this is what you're going to see. So there's quite a bit of information. This will show all of your existing workflows. So for example, here we see we have four workflows set up in this instance, and it will also separate them out by cabinets. So on the across the toolbars here, you have the options to create a new workflow. You can copy a workflow, go in and edit or delete as well. Also from here, you may select whichever workflow that you're looking at, and you can choose to either publish or unpublish as well. Also, very important, we have our permissions options, and I will go through a little bit more detail. So we have our designers. Any users that are assigned to the designer tab are going to be able to actually go in here and see these workflows and edit and maintain them from here. We also have our controllers. The controllers will be able to oversee any tasks that are existing in the workflows. And once I start going into the examples later on the webinar, I'll show you what they can see and what they can do from that as well. So in the lower half here, if you select a workflow, you will see our versions. So as you're publishing, it'll create a new version and with whatever new saves and changes you've made throughout. The nice part about this is you will also be able to, if you had changes in the past that you wanted to review or look over, you may actually select an old version. So you can see we have a change in the preview there, and you are actually able to open in read-only mode. So here I'll just open a quick example. And as you can see, I can't edit, but I can still view any settings that we have in the previous version. So if you need to compare and look back at something you've changed, and maybe to duplicate or get an idea of how it used to process, you can see it all from your read-only view. Also here you can see any active instances. So this is any document that's already in process of the workflow. You have the options to stop instances, or go straight to the task itself. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll start up just a new workflow here, just so you can see what it looks like. Start at the beginning. So when you first create a new workflow, you'll have pretty simple naming your workflow. So we can name accordingly. You can put a description on what process you want to use, and you also have your selection for your file cabinet. So down here you have your workflow user. Now this is going to be the background user for any tasks that are happening throughout that aren't assigned to a specific user or role, etc. So for this, do that, and then we have our trigger conditions. So our trigger conditions, there's three options of what you can use. First, and probably one of the most common, is our set for new documents. So for new documents, you may set an index, a certain index that will be the start and the deciding factor of what goes into your workflow. For example, if a document is stored and we want to set a status that will correspond with a new document, we can do status equals new. So any document comes into the system and is stored as a new document into the file cabinet that you selected, this will trigger your workflow. You also have a few other options in regards to what you can set. You can equal a fixed value. You can do a contain value, begins empty or not empty. So the other setting you may use is modify documents. So this is for documents that are already in a file cabinet that's being used, and you want them to, on a certain change, trigger off a workflow. So the first section you have, the above section, is going to be your before conditions. So as long as a document meets all of those criteria, whether it be a status or a date or any other index field, you can start off from there. So, and just a quick example. Again, let's say we use a status of new. So if we have documents that are already stored in the file cabinet and their status is new, they haven't triggered a workflow just yet. But if a document has this status and you want to have it change, let's say throughout a normal process, the user will index this status field and they will change the status to test. Now, once that change is made, it will trigger off the workflow. Now you can combine these two together and it'll be anything that is a new document as well as modified. So as you can see, I have the two checkboxes checked at the top. Any new documents that come in will only follow what is in the lower half in your after conditions. So it will not need the first ones because it's a new document. So there's really no indexing beforehand. It's just what goes in new. So it would follow, for example, a document that's stored as a status of test. So the last option for trigger here is also scheduling. You can set a scheduled time where any documents that meet a certain criteria will kick off the workflow at one time. So let's say every morning is when a user would be processing through this workflow. It will see any documents that have whatever you set. The rules are very similar to triggering a condition. So for example, use another status field, change the test. So any document that was stored from that scheduled time frame will trigger through. Something to note, this will trigger up to 100 documents for that scheduled time for performance reasons. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let this create so we can show you what a clean slate is. So this is the first screen you come up to once you create those, your trigger conditions and the user being used for your workflow. So as you can see, you just have your start condition. This can be edited, and you'll see the same screen you saw when you created your workflow from the beginning. So you can adjust your trigger conditions accordingly if need be at any given time. Now, across the top for the toolbar, we have, again, our publishing and unpublishing options, as well as the save option. So this is any changes you make as you go along, you can save it, but it won't be published out to the system until you hit that publish button, very similar to what you saw in the overview. You also have the option to zoom out just to be able to get a better view of what you're looking at overall, as well as some test options. It will allow you to enter in values and test run a test document essentially through that workflow. And as well as the task list option, which would be what users will see in the web client, which I will show you when we go ahead and test the workflow we're working on. So just an overview on the left-hand side here, we have all of our activities. So this will be any tasks, whether it be assignments, tasks for users, condition statements, email notifications, and web services, which will be reviewed in the advanced webinar next week. So also have our variables. So our variables, we can set any index. It's essentially an index stored within the workflow. You can populate it with any information, and you can take that information, assign it to a index field that we showed in the cabinet, or use it for other data to be used within the workflow itself, which again we will go over. So a quick example here just to show you some paths. So when you'll click and drag over whatever step you want to use, and it'll prompt you up for the configurations. And from here, again, we'll go into more detail shortly, and you'll see anything that you drag over. When they're not connected, you'll see a little red exclamation point. So that just gives you a notification, and you can click from the boxes and drag it out to the task, and that will show you which way it will connect. As you can see, the first task, the red exclamation point went away, and you carry on that through the whole workflow. Now, so just so you guys can see a clean slate, that's what you'd be looking at as a fresh one. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump on over, as I already have a workflow here created and ready to go for us. So just an overview on what we're doing today. It's a simple approval process for a company field trip. So the participant will request to participate in the company field trip, gets approved or declined from the supervisor, and from there we'll go to accounting whether or not the fee for the trip will be paid or not paid. And we'll also be using some email tasks, some email steps, and some assignment roles that we will go through from there. So, and going back, we can just get a full overview of what we're looking at with the paths and everything. So from the start, our first one we have here, we will see our trigger conditions. So for this workflow, we decided what we're going to do is just new documents that come in. So when you go create the trigger conditions, you want to know how your documents are coming in. So for this example, since it's just some simple information obtained for the participant, we decided to use our forms module, which will create a new document and index accordingly. So we match those up with our triggers. And the form will be showing you when I run through a example for our workflow. So our trigger conditions on this one, we got a status of new with a project that equals company field trip. So any documents that come in, they're stored to our specific file cabinet. We're going to see those workflows kick off. So the first step through, what you want to do, and this is a note especially if you're using a modified value to trigger a workflow, you want to make sure that there are no instances that get duplicated out. So a lot of times the first step you want to see is a data assignment, and this data assignment will change a particular index, preventing a document from re-triggering as it's going through the workflow and other indexes are changing. So for this one, being that our status field is one of our primary triggers, we're going to set this so it will not change, so it'll change to something else. So this will notify, okay, this document is now in progress, and that's mapped to an index field. So these data assignments, we can do index of a document, as well as workflow variables, which I will go over in just a moment. And from there, we will select our field accordingly with an entry type as well. Now, our entry type, we can do fixed values, for example, as our status is in progress, or we can use a variable. So this one here, we have our date field, which is indexed by a workflow system variable. So our system variables are going to be pre-existing within the workflow. Those variables will include current dates, current users, current task names. There's quite a few. And being that this is a date field, you also have your due dates, your receive dates, reminder and start dates as well. So for this example, we're just going to go with current date. Now we also have another data assignment, and with this we will be doing all of our variables on this step. Now our variables, as shown in the clean workflow that I brought up before, are going to be on the left-hand side. So for this particular example, we have our variables that are, we got text fields, and one for our email, a full name, and a supervisor, which will be done through obtained partially for our form, as well as a few other spots in the workflow itself. And you can add variables as you go, name the variable accordingly, and select a data type corresponding to whatever index type that you want to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and open our data assignment. So this is where we have the ability to assign to our variables themselves. And again, we have a few options as far as how to fill those fields. First one is a straightforward entry here. This is for email, and the email is indexed already on the document, again through the form which I will be showing you, and that's populated to that field. Now, one of the other functionalities that we can use to assign data to these variables, we can use what's called an arithmetic expression. So arithmetic expressions will use a command through a VB scripting syntax. So here I'll pull up for an example. And this is a very simple example of what we can do just with certain strings that we have. So for example, on our form, it's going to be a first name and a last name. And those variables will have in your index fields. So you can, excuse me, you can click and it will add them to our expression on the left. So what this does essentially is we're taking the first name index field, and then we're using an ampersand. Now the ampersand in VB script, what it does is it will concatenate two strings. So it'll just combine the value of one string to another and put them together. So for this, we want with the first name and last name, we'd want a space between it. So what we'll do is the first name followed by an ampersand, and then in the quotes, it will be whatever string that you put in there. So for this, it's just a space, another ampersand to add in after that, the index field for contact. Now you will see that we have our names of what the display names are, as well as the database names. Now the database names are what are going to show up in our expression. So overall, what you'll see is first name, space, last name with the result of this. Now there's a lot of other possibilities that you can do with the arithmetic expressions. And these are actually going to be, a few more examples are going to be shown in the advanced workflow that Michael's presenting next week as well. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can stay tuned, and we'll show you a few more advanced techniques of what you can do using those VB scripts. All right, so now that our data is assigned, we want to let the user know that their form has been taken in and the workflow has been started. So it kind of gives them a heads up of what's going on, where their request is. So for here, we have our email steps. Excuse me. And with this, what we're going to do is the variable that we filled with our email can now be used as an entry for who the email gets sent to. So this, you can specifically add email addresses. So you can type in an email address if it's something specific, or you can assign it to a user. Now, as long as these users have emails assigned to them in the administration tool, then that will be the email that it gets sent to. And again, for this instance, we're going to be using a global variable as something that can change and still send that email out based on that field and that variable. So we can also edit our subject line. So for this, we just have a simple subject typed in, thank you for your registration. And again, for these subject fields, the body, anything like that, you still have the option to add in any variables to change and customize what the user is seeing. So here I'll show you the body, and this is where we have, for example, our global variable that was filled out by our arithmetic expression. We can use that to customize that email. So now it's greeting that particular participant, and they'll be able to see that your document has been received, and a few reminders. So being that we're doing a field trip, the registration for the field trip is successful, and they're requesting the fee for that trip as well. So again, you have your variables, and you also have the option to link in those emails to certain tasks, which I will review a little further on as well. Okay, so what I have here, we're going to do a quick run through just what we have so far. And so this is our form. Again, this is what we decided to use as far as our initial trigger. It's very simple. You can design it accordingly from your web configurations. And what we're going to do is, for example, we're going to say I want to go on this company field trip. Okay. So from here, once I submit this, it's going to have our indexes that contain our triggers, which is what we want, and begin that workflow. Submit. And then it'll give you your form has been submitted. Now, with that, so based on what we have configured for our workflow, it should be doing the data assignments in the background. And now I should be also receiving our emails. And as you can see, this is our newly received notification thanking me for my registration and noting that there's a $10 fee for the field trip. So what I'm going to do, right now I'm logged into the same user that we have set up for our background user. So as I mentioned before, the background user will be used for any background tasks as well as anything that hasn't been explicitly assigned. So being that we only did our data assignments, the task that we set up here, just so that I can show you, is actually assigned out to our background user. So from here, and I can open up the document accordingly. And for example, which I will show you in a moment as well, we can see that all these data assignments have been made, and you can view them from there. So you can see our status was changed, our date was populated for today's date, the email that was made in the form, and our combination of our first and last name using that VBA script that I showed you earlier. So from here, I will move this along. Now also, with us being logged into our one of our controllers as well, this is what the controller will be able to see. So you'll be able to monitor tasks and see what's happening in the background. And so any instances that are there, we can see them accordingly. So I'm going to jump back over and we'll go into a little more detail as we go through our tasks here. So our first step is we are going to assign this out to our supervisor so that the supervisor can do our approvals. So what we're using in this step is what we call a substitution rule. Now, when you're assigning a task, you have a few options. You can either assign it directly to a user that will always have that task. You can assign it to a role, which will contain multiple users that the task will get assigned to. And the difference with the roles and the substitution rules is if it's assigned to a role, let's say that particular role has 2 people assigned to it. When the tasks show up in their lists, they will both be able to see it at the same time. If one person processes that task, it moves on. It doesn't wait for both to do it. So this way you have the option of multiple people. Whoever gets to it first can do that process. With the substitution rule, these lists are set up in the DocuWare administration, and it will be an order of users that would get it. So if I have the first user and they are set as out of office and they are unavailable to process that task, it will go ahead and move to the next person in that list, and so on and so forth. So this way the task isn't stuck and waiting for somebody that isn't in the office. So if we jump into the admin tool, just so I can show you where we set this up, we have our user administration and our substitution rules right here. So for example, we have our substitution rule for the webinar, and here you can add the users accordingly. So for this, I have our webinar supervisor would be the first person that would get assigned to it. And let's say that user again is out of office. It will now assign it out to the next person in that list. So for this instance, we have a user called webinar substitution. So they'll sub in and be able to process that task and move it right along. And we also have our lists that go along with our substitution rule, and this you can set multiple rules to a particular list to select from, just to keep everything organized. So you can see we have our webinar substitution rule already set up and ready to go in that list. So we're going to jump over to our workflow designer. So again, we're selecting it from our substitution list, and our substitution role will be selected as to the order of who is getting this task. Okay, so from here, I will show you what is set up for a task. This will give multiple options, some email notifications, and data assignments as well within these tasks. So first things first, you have name just as any of your other entries that are created in the workflow designer. And in the bottom section, you have how those decisions are taken. So these decisions, you can use either a stamp that you can place anywhere on the document, and you can set what information will be contained in that stamp. For example, you can set the user that's processing this step, the date and time, decision names, or even your workflow step name. From there, you can also adjust your fonts at the bottom to whatever size you want and whatever font you want. So on our next tab, we have our notification tab, and this is very similar to what we saw on our specific email step earlier. It's just combined into the task itself. So whoever is assigned this task will be the one receiving the email. And this will be your reminder saying, okay, you have a task to process. So for this, again, we'll go into the subject, and we used a few different variables. So we have our workflow variable is our workflow name. So that'll be listed under your system variables so that we know what workflow we're working in, just to kind of give a better overview of what we're seeing. And again, on this one, we're using that full name global variable that we set up. And this will say that this person is waiting approval for your field trip. Body set up the same way as our email steps. And again, we'll use that full name variable and waiting for approval. Now this is where I also included our link. So these links can be set up to a task or task list, as you can see on the right-hand side. And they can go to, in this situation at least, in that email, they can click on that link in the email and be able to send you right to the task in question. And I will show you that as well in a moment. And again, you can add your system variables, global variables, or index fields to better customize these emails. So our next and probably our most important step on our tasks is the decisions that are going to be taken by the users. So these the two decisions we made, we got our approved and our declined options. So each one that you add, you have the name of the decision. Again, you can put a description as well as a color, and this color will correspond with the workflow design as those paths that you'll see. The next one we have is our form tab, and from here you can add fields to populate that the task user will be able to see. So if I come down to our decline, we also have a comment field. If you end up going to decline the process, it will prompt you with a field called comments, and you can customize this form field accordingly as well. So here we'll see that it's a mandatory field, so it has to be entered, as well as the size of the field. And you can also pre-fill or set a select list. So if you have a select list for the value that you're filling out, you'll be able to make it so that they can either only use a select list or at least have the option to use it. And again, you'll see those pre-fill fields, which we used earlier for our task that I showed you to kind of put a stop in the workflow as I went through for you guys. Now, from there, each process, each step that's done in these tasks, you can also do a data assignment. So for this one, we want to keep that status field going to kind of keep track of where that document is in our workflows. So for this instance, if we declined it, it's going to set a status of declined. And as well as we can use that form field that we set up earlier to populate an index field. So we have a comments index field that will copy everything from what was typed in that step and go ahead and put it right into the index of that document. From here, we also have a global variable that I set up earlier for supervisor. And this is using one of those workflow system variables that I explained earlier, and that's going to our current user. So that's going to be, again, whoever is processing this task. So in this instance, would usually be our supervisor that was in our substitution list that we created. So from there, this Assign To tab, this will be who the task gets assigned to after the task has been processed. So for this, we're going to just assign it to our controller that we're using at the moment. But again, you can use this is the same settings that you'd see on just an explicit assignment step. So also at the top, we have our escalations, and these can be customized as far as reminders for when a task needs to be processed that hasn't yet been processed. You can also set, again, another email notification, and it will send an email after you reach a certain amount of time that the task hasn't been handled. You also have your due dates, and this will be if after a certain period of time, it will be marked as overdue, as well as reassignments going to particular users. And this will be brought up as well in our next webinar. So once that approval, excuse me, once the approval comes through, we'll be routing that further down. So just to show you what we have so far, I will pull this up for you guys. Now, again, being that we're in a controller profile that we're logged in as, we'll be able to see anything that's assigned to. So you can see our current user is our webinar supervisor, as per our data assignment that we did earlier. So I'm going to open up this document. You'll be able to see the document that we have, as well as our options that we set up in that task. We have approved or declined. And for this example, we're going to click approved. Since we didn't have any form set up, there's nothing here other than a confirm button. Or if you go to decline, we'll have our form field that we set up in the step. Now, as you saw in the beginning of those configuration for those tasks, we can take a decision based on a stamp or by the form fields. So for example, we have our stamps here, and what you'll see is we have our approved and our decline stamps, so based on each decision, and you'll be able to see your workflow stamps, and it does have our regular stamps as well if the user has any assigned to them. You'll be able to know that it's a workflow stamp by the icon here that will show the checkbox, the check mark in the icon as well. So those are going to be what actually processes your decisions. So for this example, we are going to approve. And once you do that, you'll be able to place this stamp anywhere within the workflow. So you can see where, so you can place it so it's in a spot that it doesn't block any information. Now, if you were to process by a form, it will, as long as there's some blank space on that document, it will put it into a space that shouldn't be covering any important data, at least on the document. So we're going to go ahead and place this stamp through. Okay. One thing I want to show you as well, any documents that have been processed through, whether it be tasks, some automatic information, we can actually view the workflow history of a document. This can be done from a regular search or from your task lists themselves. So this would be just a right click, and you're going to be able to open up your workflow history. So the first thing you'll see, by default, you'll be seeing any tasks that have had user intervention show up. It'll give you the step name, the operation that was handled, as well as a date. In these history fields, you can actually expand to see if there's any data assignments, if there's more detail regarding that. If there's errors, it will actually give you a little bit more information regarding that as well. And if the user, it'll show for who assigned, who processed that task by more detail. As you can see, we don't see our data assignments by default. What we can do is click our Show Automatic Activities, and this will bring you all those automatic activities that are handled in the background. So for this, we have our data assignments, which will show any. So for example, our first one was our indexes that are dropped in, and our second one is our global variables. So and just a little more detail as to where your document has been. So we're going to go ahead and jump back into our workflow here, and we'll continue on. And I apologize, forgot to mention here, we have, when we had that task waiting for our supervisor, this was the email they received prior to receiving it. And this will bring up our task as well. So just clicking that will bring you right into the web client. If maybe it'll make you log in if you're not already logged in, and you can process that task specifically, and it's already up and ready to go for you. And just a note on these tasks, you can even process these tasks if you have our DocuWare mobile app. So mobile app, you'll be able to, if you're logged into that, you'll be able to access your tasks that are assigned to you, stamp and process anything accordingly, just like you would in the web client. Okay, so next up here, after that process is handled by the supervisor, we do have two steps here. So if it were to be declined, the participant that filled out the form originally would receive an email saying that it was declined. Now this will utilize our index fields that are processed with that as well. So that's the same as you saw earlier, except what we're going to do is actually include what is now indexed into that comment section. So we can actually give the reason, okay, this is why your participation was declined, and actually draw out a comment. So I will show you an example a little later on just to see everything in full and what that would look like. All right, so from there, now we're going to be going to our accounting department. This will be handling the payment for the field trip. And we have our assignment. So as I mentioned before, we have our roles. We have our webinar accounting role, which would include, for this example, I have two accounting clerks that would be in charge of handling if the payment was received or not. From here, we will now go to our task. Excuse me. So in this task, they are going to be checking if the payment was received, and if the payment is received, we'll be approving or declining whether or not it has or has not. So again, similar to what we have for our supervisor task, again, we're going to have the option to take the decision by stamp or by the form itself. This one, we don't have a notification set up, so you don't have to check it. So if they're going to process just as they receive the money, they can just jump into their task list, find the user, and process from there. Again, we have our two decisions, very similar to what we set up with our supervisor task. And again, we have our data assignments. For this example, either approved that it's been paid, or it has not been paid out. Again, from there, we can assign a task accordingly. Again, we're going to be just assigning it out to our workflow controller that we have set up. And so we have here, depending on which path that task is taken, it'll either be going down the paid path, and it will send an email again back out to the participant mentioning that, okay, your task has been approved and the payment's received, and you can go to this to the field trip. Same thing, but just on the other side, it will be that the payment hasn't been received and you're unable to participate. So let's jump back into our workflow again. So right now what we have is our supervisor has just approved, at least to allow the participant to go to the field trip. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our roles that are now going to be sent out to multiple users. So in this instance, we have our two clerks, accounting clerk 1 and accounting clerk 2. So they will both see this task in their lists that will allow either one of them to process. So whoever has a chance or whoever's the one to take in that check, they can go ahead and process it. Once that task is processed, it's pulled out of both of their lists and moves on to the next step. So we're gonna open this up here. And as you can see, once we open that document, our previous step, we had applied the stamp to the document. So they'll be able to see the stamp on the top right of the document and what was put in based on what we set. So this time what I'm going to do is change it a little bit here, and we're going to just process this by the form. So we're going to select, okay, I've sent in my money, so they're going to go ahead and say paid. And it will move on to the next section. Now you can see, since we're watching from the overview, you can see it got pulled out of the other user altogether. So what we have now is our document that's now been processed by our supervisor as well as by our accounting, which from there is going to exit our workflow. But just for viewing purposes, we have another task set up just for our controller. And here is, as I mentioned before, if you put that task through by form, it will put that stamp in a blank, in a clear space, so that it's not overlapping anything. So you see our lower stamp right here. This was the one that was taken by a form. So I didn't place that anywhere, but it was placed by DocuWare, and it's able to check and see that there's nothing in the way, and we can clearly see those stamps. So from here, we can push this through. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just pull up a search. So this is our form that we have processed. And again, this is from a result list that I can view this history. And now you'll be able to see everything that this document has gone through. And it will also show you that this document is now out of the workflow and has been processed entirely. So what I'll do, just another quick run through so we can see everything all in one shot. So we're going to fill out a new form here. Okay, we're going to submit that. So as a user, when you see those documents come in, those tasks, you will get the number notification at the top showing you that you have a new task waiting for you. So for this is our controller task. So we're going to go ahead and confirm that through. And from here, we're going to go to our monitor tasks. Again, this is just as a controller that you'll be able to see this, just so we can see our tasks that are in the workflow right now. So now it's at our supervisor. And we have our information here. And we can either select approve or declined. So for this one, let's approve it one more time. And this will move on to our accounting clerks. So again, now this is out to both of our accounting clerks here. And let's say accounting clerk 1 is going to be the one that handles payment. Let's say they ran up to the time of the field trip, and unfortunately, I did not pay my bill. So we're going to send that through as a declined, and you will now see the task pulled out of the other user. So for example, we have, again, our notification that was sent to us saying you've applied for it, and then our so this is going to be from our supervisor first. Might be running a little slow on on my email side, but you'll see those emails come through with no problem. So again, we can open this up, and you can see, since I did the form by both, it was always put into a blank space, not covering any information from there. And the stamps will be colored accordingly based on how you set those decisions. So back into our workflow here. One of the other options, as you go through, you also have the ability to set up our error handling tasks or paths. These error paths will be done on any automatic activities. So whether it be a data assignment, a user assignment, or an email as well, you can create that error path and set it to a task. So for this example, we just set a task that gets sent to our controller or our main background user that we're using, and they can confirm that what the error was. And again, from there, they'll be able to see it in our workflow history, why it errored out. So this prevents any tasks from going missing unexpectedly. So if they just error out of the workflow, we don't want them to just exit the workflow and no one will be able to see them. So this way we can route accordingly based on whatever happens in that particular moment. Okay, so from there, that is our overview. As you saw, went through the entire process that document has gone through from start to finish, and from there, if we have any questions, I will have Vern and Phil go ahead and go through them with us, and we can answer what we need to.
Okay, thanks a lot, Greg, for this great workflow info. I've seen that during the session, indeed, there were a lot of questions incoming. So let's have a look at the most important ones. And so that you can, that we can talk a little bit about what might be interesting for all of our participants. So first of all, there was a question considering the trigger methods, which means either the trigger regarding index data or the scheduled trigger, whether these two can be combined, which I can also answer immediately because it's quite clear. No, it's either one or the other is basically the answer, but this might be a question of a lot of our participants, I think. So you can either select to trigger new workflow instances, as we call them, by storing new documents with certain index criteria, or you can use the scheduled workflow. And then there was a second question also regarding the scheduled workflow, because Greg, you mentioned that there is a limit of 100 documents that will be enter the workflow at that given time. And the question is, does this mean, or what happens to others if you have, for example, 105 documents, and will those 5 be ignored or dropped, or what will happen to those?
Okay. So from there, that would have to be dropped into the next scheduling. I mean, if that limit's set, as you said, those left over, again, that'll have to be reprocessed on the next run through.
Okay, great. Then there was a question regarding the email formatting, which means in the, you presented or you showed that it's possible to enter text and to use different options like variables or links in there, but is this body plain text, and or what other formatting options are available, which I'll also quickly just answer because I had these questions here in support, Leslie, and talked a little bit with our product department. So I have a quite up-to-date answer available, which is, well, not that up to date, but quite clear. Right now, it is indeed plain text. So there aren't that many other formatting, or there aren't any other formatting options. But we will add more sophisticated, or we'll add more sophisticated formatting options in the future. So we'll change a little bit this option that we have there, and this editor basically for the email body. And then there was another question regarding the working or multiple persons, multiple employees of a company working at one workflow at the same time. So is there some mechanism to prevent that two users open at the same time one workflow task and do basically at the same time the approval or whatever? And for example, one is approving and the other is rejecting. So is there some mechanism to prevent this?
With that, if someone is going through and processing, you'll actually the document will show as locked by another user because it's being processed. So it's only one decision is going to go through. So whichever, so let's say user one is in the process of looking at that task and making it a decision from there, they will take that decision because when user two goes in to look at it after the fact, while user one is still working on it within a reasonable time frame that's been open, they'll receive a message saying that's been locked.
Okay, great. Perfect. Yeah, I think due to the time that we already passed 1 hour, we'll answer the rest of the questions now for the next few minutes, but not live. We'll answer those after the webinar. We'll publish them later on. So thanks for now. Thank you, Greg. What we want to ask you now is, first of all, I have two things left. Before we finish the webinar, I would first of all like to know your opinion about this little poll I just started, which is which topic would you like most to be covered in the advanced workflow webinar next week? So curious about your opinion, and we'll of course use this also to prepare for next week's webinar. So the answer options are arithmetic expressions, so to go in a little bit more into detail into those, the escalation levels that you can use in the task, external data assignment, or the troubleshooting a little bit more. Would this be most interesting for you? So curious about your answers. And as you've seen at the beginning, we're few more colleagues than just Greg and me. And one of those colleagues showed me or told me about a little option in between, which is to show the results of this poll, and this I want to use now. So as you can see, external data assignment won few percent more than arithmetic expressions. So basically, those seem to be the most interesting topics, and we will definitely have a look at those and to also make this as an influence for the next week's webinar. And then, as I said, one last thing, which is that we need your feedback. As you already see, besides this poll, after we finish this webinar, if you've closed the webinar window, a short survey will pop up, and we basically want to know how you rate this webinar today, and what was the most valuable content for you. So give us your feedback. This is really valuable for us. Please tell us also which topics you would like to have in other webinar sessions within the next month. So not only for next week, as we just saw on the poll. And thank you for your feedback, ideas, and your time in advance. So yeah, thanks a lot for participating in today's webinar. It was great to have you here, and I really hope you enjoyed it and that you've got a lot of useful information today. And see you next week for the advanced session. Goodbye.